Always a pleasure and honor to be on your at your APEC conference, especially presenting.
Well,
And
John,
thank you
thank you
very
so
much.
much. I should tell people just again to archive this. You called me earlier in the week and you were figuratively jumping up and down. You were like, "This is
Yes, I
so
was.
exciting, so exciting." So here we are,
After
sir.
years of being told to be quiet, I've suddenly been told, show your stuff.
Okay, well, I'm managing the slide deck, but just give me a back or forward, and I will do that. And I'm going to take
Okay,
myself out and
let's,
hand things over to you.
without further ado, welcome to the age of laboratory gravity modification. I'm going to present experiments that you guys can perform in your garages or laboratories yourself. You can see for yourself. And like I said, 2 weeks ago, I was waved ahead to start presenting all of this stuff and publishing it. So without further ado, laboratory demonstration of gravity modification by EM fields through gem gravity unification theory. And Ken Doyle was my chief technician. A lot of these slides are taken from a DARPA, a presentation to DARPA, where they told me, we don't want you doing any experiments, only do theory. Yes, sir. Please sign my check. All right, forward. Okay, I'll talk about just myself very quickly, uh, just so you know who I am and my kind of license to do this sort of work. Okay, we'll talk about evidence of gravity modification and context in terms of the gem theory or unification theories. The requirement to search for a unified field theory of E&M and gravity, Einstein's work. I'll talk about this stuff very briefly. We're going to get to the experiments as quickly as possible. Summary of the gem, and then we're going to talk about the basic equation coming out of the gem, which is called the vacuum Bernoulli equation for gravity modification. Just like the aerodynamic Bernoulli equation gives us flight, this will give us flight even in a vacuum. So then I'm going to talk about demonstration experiments at length. I'll spend most of my time doing that. And then I'll discuss a new report confirming Jack Sarfati's metamaterial theory in connection with this gravity modification. Then I'll summarize it for you. Forward. Okay, since 1981, when I got my PhD at Lawrence Livermore Lab, and by the way, I had the great pleasure and honor of meeting Frederick Winterberg several occasions, and he came to the lab, and I remember him arguing with my thesis advisor about stuff. It was great. Anyway, so I've worked on. I was trained to do fusion, but I'm doing plasmas, and became an astrophysics. Plasma physics and astrophysics are just Siamese twins, and then unification theory, and then of course on Mars. Next. Okay, yeah, just anyway. So okay, I've had a long career in aerospace. As a aerospace contractor to the Defense Department and Department of Energy, and even to NASA. So on we go. Forward. Okay, now gravity modification for unified field theory. Okay, we know we have four forces operating in that we know about in the universe, the cosmos, that explain most 99% of what we see in the cosmos. You can't ever explain everything. But there's the strong force that leads to nuclear power, nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors, fusion reactors. That's what lights the stars. Then we have the weak force that also works together, and those are guys that are short range. Their realm of action is about the size of a subatomic particle, so they're short range. Then we have the two long range forces of in the universe, the electromagnetic force and the gravity force. They're long range, they go all the way across the universe. Now we also have a universe that is dominated it started out as a vacuum, and then 1 second later, it was an expanding fireball composed of hydrogen, which is two particles, the two stable charge the only two stable particles in the universe, subatomic particles, electrons and protons, and they're both charged. So we went from having one force and a vacuum, a Planckian vacuum full of Planck masses and antimasses. Then 1 second later, as near as they can reconstruct, we had a expanding fireball of hydrogen with gravity and E&M forces in it. So Einstein attacked this problem. He thought he was certain you could isolate the two long-range forces. And he also said somehow hydrogen is the key to understanding matter, which is, of course, the source of charge and mass that drive the gravity and E&M forces. Next. Okay, here's gravity, the gravity constant, big G, two rocks out in space, they attract each other with a force that's 1/r squared. And the product times the product of the masses times big G. Big G is arguably the most important number in the cosmos. Next. Okay, now it had been reported by Kozyrev, a Russian scientist, in 1968 that when he spun gyroscopes with E&M Tesla three-phase power, if he spun them so they were spin vector down, they lost weight. If you spun them at 90 degrees to the gravity vector, they lost half their weight. They lost half what they did when they were spinning down. If you got them spinning straight up, they didn't lose weight at all. So it was a half angle spinner relationship. Very strange. We got some money together because, and Hayasaka and Takeuchi in 1989 did the same experiment, and they got the same results. We got some support to repeat the experiment in as much detail as we could. We did everything exactly like Hayasaki and Takeuchi reported, and we got the same result. So this thing is real. Now, there was a guy, some smart aleck from University of Colorado, took a gyroscope and spun it with compressed air and got no results. And therefore he said, this is nonsense. No, that's called, he was a professional debunker. Same place that produced the Condon report. Next. So we know we can do this in the lab. Okay, unification theory. Einstein's great quest. Hey, Al Einstein, he was a really smart guy. So if he says something can be done, who are we to argue with him? But he didn't like quantum mechanics, but it turns out quantum mechanics is the key. Next. Planck scale is determined by quantum mechanics. You have a length, and it all depends on big G and Planck's constant and the speed of light. So there's a Planck length, Planck's, defining length scale, and then you've got a Planck mass, and then you've got even the Planck charge. Next. The basic gem theory is that gravity fields are equivalent to arrays of what's called E cross B drift. That's from plasma physics. You can look it up on the web. And it affects all particles, regardless of charge or mass. Even though it's a pair of E&M fields, it looks like gravity because it affects all charged particles, regardless of charge, regardless of mass, the same. Okay, also, the second postulate is that gravity and E&M exist because electrons and protons exist. That is, electrons and protons separated from the Planck scale, became two separate charged particles at the same time that gravity and E&M appeared as separate forces in the Big Bang. So those two things were correlated. Next. Now, I'm a plasma physicist, and I became aware of this effect in plasma physics called the E cross B drift. It's also can be written in terms of the Poynting vector, which is the radiation pressure vector of E&M. And you can, if you have two plates and a magnetic field coming out of the page, and you put an electron or a proton or a charged zinc atom, whatever you put in there, they'll all end up moving at the same rate in the same direction. Now, if you take the plates and tilt them with each other, they'll actually all accelerate at the same rate. You can do that with a simple computer simulation. It's in the limit, though, of the magnetic field is much stronger than the electric field, which corresponds to non-relativistic. So this is a non-relativistic model. Next, you can do the same thing by making a time variation between the plates. Rather than having them change spatially, curved spatially, they are curved in time. So if the two plates have electric fields between them, an electric field, by putting a voltage ramp, keeping the magnetic field constant, and then having a voltage ramp, a sawtooth, you can get everything to accelerate at the same rate in the same direction, regardless of charge or mass. It looks just like gravity. So next. So that's based on a physical model. You can also understand how you can get gravity from radiation pressure. If you put two bright objects in a dark box, say you're up in the space station, no gravity fields, you got two bright objects in a dark box, they repel each other due to mutual radiation pressure. There's a 1/r² force. Now, if you take the box, heat it white hot, put in two cold objects, they will attract one another with a 1/r² force because they mutually shadow. So this is the basis for the what's called the Sakharov put-off model of E&M gravity unification. You all know Hal Puthoff. He's not just an expert on remote viewing. He is a superb scientist. And he has a theory that's very similar to mine in this respect. And the results of my theory can also be derived from his theory. Next. One of the things that happens is we know from quantum mechanics, we're surrounded by a sea of electromagnetic energy called the zero-point fluctuation, the ZPF. In my theory, that vanishes. It self-censors. So in a sense, the E&M fields that are creating all of this energy around us also create anti-gravity, so the universe doesn't collapse into a black hole. So there you see, merely by the fact that we have the existence we have, that E&M and gravity can neutralize each other. Next. Okay, so then there's a second gem postulate. That's the separate appearance of electrons and protons being correlated with the separate appearance of gravity and E&M. Move forward. I'm not going to go into this in detail, but it's there. You can see it in the literature. Next. Here's the correlation that the square root of the mass ratio between electron and proton is correlated with the logarithm of a fifth dimension that expands out from it's a Kaluza-Klein fifth dimension that expands out from the Planck scale. The key number to the universe, by the way, is 42.85 because that's the square root of the mass ratio. Next. You can invert these formulas and get formulas for the proton mass out of the vacuum. leading to hydrogen, and then also the strength of the gravity constant. Next, I'm just very quickly summarizing this. The resulting formula for the gravitation constant is the most accurate formula known from a physical derivation. I mean, anybody can, if you put enough diddle factors into an equation, you can get the gravitation constant. But this one does not use any diddle factors. It's a physical derivation. Also, you get the mass of the proton. You can get the mass of the electron too, but the mass of the proton is the simplest, and that comes into within 4 parts per 1,000. And the G you can get to parts per 10,000. Next. So this theory is solid. It also says that just like you can bend starlight, which is electromagnetic radiation, with gravity, in this theory, you can also bend gravity with starlight. Next. You can derive from this theory using this E cross B drift model, time with a time variation on the E cross B drift speed to make gravity, and then Newtonian gravity theory, and because we're doing in a non-relativistic limit, then also the Poynting's theorem. And you put that all, mix it together in the pot. Next. You end up with this top equation. You can integrate that in time with the condition that the magnetic field is constant in these little cells in space, and you end up with what we call the vacuum Bernoulli equation. It has a static pressure, which that's the gravity field energy density, or an energy density that can be associated with gravity. And then you have the Poynting field and the electromagnetic, and those two things vary together in order to, so that there's some of this, the difference between them is a constant. Next. Now, what does that mean? It says that if you create an intense field of Poynting vector, like radiation around an antenna, or the field around a coil, just a coil that's charged with AC, it will create a zone of strengthened gravity where the Poynting field is strong, S squared is strong, gravity will be slightly stronger, but that makes it pulls the gravity fields out from the coil, so the coil gets lighter. So that's it. The coil, which drives everything, feels less gravity, but the air around the coil, when you energize this coil with AC, so it has fluctuating Poynting vector, the air around it gets slightly heavier, but the coil gets lighter. And you can visualize gravity lines of force at a distance, just like around an airplane wing. You have the same static atmospheric pressure, but close to the wing, the pressure varies in order to give you lift. Next. Now, how do you do this? How do you see this in the lab? I'm going to give you a cookbook on how to do it in your own garage or study or laboratory. Get out your chef set. Let's start with the cookbook. Okay, buy a toy motor, probably rated up to somewhere between 9 volts, 12 volts, so it can handle that kind of voltage. Build a little enclosure, hang that, take a 3-lobe, we took a 3-lobe armature, disconnected 2 of the lobes, so there's just 1 lobe active, and then we powered it by thin wires just thin copper wires, insulated copper wires. And we hung the whole thing beneath a balloon inside a light enclosure to shield it from air currents. And then we powered it with, and this is crucial. You have to power it at 400 hertz or above and at 12 volts or above output voltage from that amplifier. Take a nice electric guitar amplifier and power it at 400 hertz or above. There apparently was threshold effects. So if it comes on, this effect appears as voltage squared. And if you don't supply enough voltage, you won't see anything. You have to get that voltage up there above 12 volts or above output voltage. And you have to have frequencies at or above 400 hertz. Next. Okay. To create enclosure, we just got some PVC pipe and put clear plastic, painting cloth wrapped around it and secured by tape. So we would have a nice phone booth kind of sized thing where there would be still air. Could be isolated from any air currents. Next. Okay, go down to the store, get helium balloons, probably 2, make them Mylar so they'll keep their helium for a couple days. You want that just in case there's any trouble. Like any experiment, there's a certain amount of futzing around before you get the thing to work. Okay, as I said, buy a toy motor rated at like somewhere between 9 and 12 volts, and take the 3-lobe, basically one of those 3-lobe little armatures, and disable 2 of the windings, just so you just have one winding, and then connect it to this powerful source of 400 hertz or above at 12 volts. Next. Okay, place the balloon coil assembly in an enclosure in equilibrium away from the walls, and it'll form a nice equilibrium where the coil is connected with the wires, and the wires are being pulled up off the floor. So the balloon will pull the coil up until there's enough wire weight to balance so it's supporting the weight of the coil plus the wires dangling beneath us. So it finds a equilibrium position. Okay, let the air become still. Just let it sit there. Then energize at 400 hertz or above and voltage 12 volts or above. The coil will rise instantly. This power is applied and sink instantly when the power is withdrawn. It'll try and find a new equilibrium, pulling more wire off the floor because the coil gets lighter. And you turn it off, the coil gets heavier and it sinks back down to put more wires on the floor to find a new equilibrium position. And I'm going to show you a video of that. Next. All right. You see on the left, there's the helium balloon and the nylon fiber dangling beneath the coil, dangling beneath the balloon. And you just have a coil there with 2 thin wires. And it's all in an enclosure. Now, we're going to hit it with, we're going to show you the video. Let's see if this works. How about that?
Sorry, I'm muted. John, why don't I do this? I'm going to take down the talk and
just put up the videos I sent you.
Yeah.
Or just link directly to the videos. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is just not.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We'll get you taken care of here. So let me see.
Still in the stone age of actually doing these conferences. A lot of stuff that we'd like to do doesn't work first time we do it. Okay, yeah, put up the video.
Okay. And So share screen, GEM test 2. Okay. And
yep, there we go. Okay, here's the voltage. Watch this thing. Watch the coil. Turn on the power, it rises instantly.
Power
Up to 12 volts. Turn it off. It drops. Repeat. Repeat the video. Here.
Here. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, now I got it.
Power.
You can see from the lines on the paper behind it, the coil is rising.
Power.
When the power is on, it drops when the power is off. This is a very, you're looking at changes only of about 10 milligrams. It's a very sensitive way to make a cheap, it's a cheap but very sensitive way to measure weight changes, is to dangle things beneath balloons like it. Did everybody see that?
Yeah,
Good.
we ran through it twice. So why don't
Okay,
I, John, you want me to go to the next one?
Next one. Okay. Now, that's with just single phase. The most efficient way to do this is with three phase. You have a rotating electromagnetic field. It's not just going on and off or oscillating back and forth. It's rotating. This is forms what's called, I call a Tesla pointing vortex. If you do this in a motor case, this is called an induction motor. This is invented by Tesla. Now they're making these very nice, very powerful motors for model aircraft and race cars, and you can get these things off the net. They're very cheap. I'll show you the ones we've used. And what you do is you take it apart, take off the rotor. You don't want the rotor. The only thing you want spinning is the fields. You want a pointing vortex, a Tesla pointing vortex. Next. Okay. Now, if you put this on a sensitive chemical scale, here's what you're going to see. Go launch.
Okay, let me take that down. And so this is GEM test 1. Hopefully this is the right
Test
one.
1, that's it. Okay, now see, now I want you guys to notice there's a negative sign here. It's losing weight.
There you go.
Okay, repeat. Okay, here, I'll repeat it. You turn it on. We're using liquid metal contacts. It loses, we turn it on, it instantly loses weight. And then you turn off the power, it regains its weight. I'm going to do this one more time. Yeah, there you go. Okay. It's that simple. We also suspended the coil by a nylon filament above the scale and ran it. It didn't affect the scale at all. There was no electromagnetic interference on the scale. And the earliest results, you saw the balloon thing, that was entirely mechanical. So it can be done right in your lab. Now these are small changes. Okay, now people complained that we were running the coil on top of a electronic scale, which was the most sensitive way to do that. So what we did is we got a load cell. We built a framework using plexiglass. We got a electronic load cell. And we got one of these coils from these brushless motors, took out the rotor. So we just had the coil with the spinning, the pointing vortex in there, Tesla pointing vortex. And we also connected it by liquid metal contacts. So there was no forces between the forces. There are no forces or only very tiny forces between the electric contacts and the actual coil. We also put the whole thing under a plexiglass dome to isolate it from air currents. And so now the idea is that we were isolating the weight measuring device, the load cell, so it's far away from where the fields are. And you can make that wire, that thing, as long as you wanted. We had to make everything fit under this dome, so we made it. But we have a T at on a plastic bar on top of the load cell end, and we dangled two fibers, nylon fibers down to hold up the coil and support it as it dangled its three-phase current connections into the liquid metal. We use Gallistan liquid metal. I don't recommend anybody using mercury unless you want to get mad as a hatter. So here's the results. Next. Oh, I'm sorry. Here is the motor we used. It's a Gould RC brushless motor with ESC waterproof brushless motor combo, 34 kV brushless motor for 1/10 RC truck motor airplane. And I'm sorry, I don't know what that VI anyway. So you just go on Amazon.com. You can order it for like $40 and it comes with its own power supply. It runs on 12 volts. Now, there's only one problem. This thing is optimized to run model aircraft or model trucks, cars, so that when you raise the power, it has a power buffering system. So the power does not come up to maximum except after a time lag, and that's to prevent breaking gears with high torques or spinning tires, things like that. They didn't want that, so there's a certain amount of power buffering, so you don't get instant results. I'll show you the results in a minute, but anyway, you can get this right off that. Okay, here's the load cell we used in the experiment. Load cell sensor part RIPG 300 gram. It was a 300 gram capacity load cell, aluminum load cell. And okay, here's the readout, the data readout for it. Next. You can buy this with it. I think this thing was about $150 altogether. This stuff is inexpensive and widely available now. So Lodestar, I would recommend just try to be imaginative unless you've got stuff sitting around in your laboratory that does similar things. I would try to duplicate what I'm showing you exactly, because you never know. There's always hidden variables in these things. Next. So that's the basic hardware. Now, we would wait for this thing to be nice and quiet. We kept everybody out of the room, so there was not only do we have it under dome, but we kept everybody out of the room for 2 hours before we actually started it. Then we fired it up, and it started losing weight. And then we would turn off the power, and it would regain it. You can see that sawtooth. So it rides up back to its old weight. And we did that twice in this experiment, and we ended up losing 150 milligrams. A tenth of a gram type weight losses. And you can do this for like about a $200 experiment. And it's nice and clean because the load cell is well separated from the coil, so no one can claim that the load cell is talking. There's electronic crosstalk between the load cell and the coil, and all of this stuff is very standard. So I'm telling you guys how to do this yourselves. And please don't let anybody complain, oh, Brandenburg doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. Unless they have repeated this experiment. And the balloon experiment is even cheaper. All you need is a guitar amplifier, electric guitar amplifier, to give you that 12-volt output at 400 hertz. So next, we also did a no result experiment where we supported the coil. So there was just a little bit of weight on, there was still only a tiny amount of weight on the load cell, and we turned it on and off. And this is just the standard noise we saw. So we saw no effect without power. So friends, we now are living in the age of demonstrable gravity modification in the lab. These experiments are simple, they're straightforward, and they don't cost very much. So I urge you to reproduce these results. Get your own bragging rights. I was waved ahead on this. These results are like 2 years old. Suddenly, the people I talked to, like at DARPA, they said, we want you to publish it. Something has happened. The government wants it out now that electromagnetic gravity modification is now possible. After years of ridiculing anybody who reported anything like this, and even hooking up false debunking experiments like running stuff with compressed air rather than E&M, like in the case of the gyroscopes. Now, suddenly, it's all out there and you can all do it. Now, you can do this for like about $200. Just imagine what Uncle Sammy can do if he throws $100 billion at this. So I am quite confident now that the US government has mastered anti-gravity technology, and we have our own flying saucers flying around. So we have achieved a fundamental level of parity, technological parity, with some of the people visiting here. Now, we haven't got warp drive yet, but hey, we don't need warp drive right now. We, by the way, my theory, the GEM theory, says that if you want to modify gravity, that's bending space-time. If you want to get warp drive, you can twist space-time into a pretzel. That's warp drive. It requires more power, but the power level should not be prohibitive. We should be able to do this, just like Captain Kirk in the Enterprise. So, friends, next. The picture you're seeing is the Sikorsky Cipher. It was flying around in the 80s. It's obviously a flying saucer, or rather a flying donut or torus. And it was based on the aerodynamic Bernoulli equation by a very skillful use of that and use of modern materials. Now, we now have a vacuum Bernoulli equation, and it can give us flight even in vacuum on the surface of the moon. So it has the same, if we look at the Bernoulli equation, it's got a static pressure and a dynamic pressure, rho v squared. It's got P plus rho v squared. That's constant. There's a plus sign between them. In the case of the vacuum Bernoulli equation, there's a negative sign between them. But that just means you have to rearrange things slightly. There's nothing that, it's not an impediment to developing flight technology at all. So it can be done. theoretically, and now you could do it in your own garage, your own laboratory. So please don't let me hear a chorus of complaints about Brandenburg. Oh, he misspelled words in his presentation. Oh, Brandenburg's just a plasma physicist. What does he know about gravity and electromagnetism? You know, no. Repeat the experiments as I have described them in detail, and you will see these same effects. And realize that we now live in an age of gravity modification technology. Because if you can do this stuff very simply and cheaply, just imagine what the US government has done already. Apparently, the government has had this technology now for decades. So we have a fundamental level of technological parity with the ETs, good and bad. Now, another thing that has happened simultaneously with this was published in October. We made the first presentation of this, by the way, back in 1998. And we were basically told not to talk about it anymore. So we didn't. Yes, sir. Please give us more money. They didn't give us more money, but they told us if you want any more money in the future, don't talk about this. Now, people have been putting glasses of water, blocks of ice, and quartz crystals on top of sensitive scales, like the one I used for the GEM experiment. So now we are dealing with highly active materials electromagnetically. Quartz, water, both have very high dielectric constants. They simply irradiated it with a 5-watt laser. Now that's a powerful laser. That'll blind you. So be careful if you do a repeat of this experiment. But look at the weight losses they got. Once again, we're using pointing vector, that's the laser, to modify local gravity. However, this is extremely important. My theory, the GEM theory, and the experiments I did were basically vacuum. Everything was derived considering there was a vacuum. It was the vacuum Bernoulli equation. Jack has added material to his theory. He calls it metamaterial. Metamaterial basically just means it affects the speed of light, local speed of light. So in honor of him, I call this the J factor for Jack. J for Jack. S is already taken. That's the pointing vector. So J for Jack. It turns out it appears as a term when I have just quickly tried to redo the Bernoulli equation type derivation, but we get a negative sign due to the Sarfati factor, big J. So once again, we're seeing, though, pointing vector affecting local gravity. But in this case, it's been amplified considerably by Jack's metamaterial factor. So, hats off to Jack. He's shown the way, basically, to make this a much more powerful effect. But I'm going to leave it at that. Next. Okay, summary. Gravity modification directly by E&M fields can be predicted from the GEM theory. 3 experiments can be performed easily to demonstrate small-scale gravity modification. Now, these are in a kind of vacuum limit or just air, you know. Gravity modification directly by E&M fields is now a demonstrated reality. We have it, guys. We have it. The human race has now control of space-time structure. And you can see it in a small way in your own laboratory or garage using easily obtained equipment. Now, recent reports indicate Jack Sarfati's metamaterial theory can greatly amplify gravity modification. This is very important. We got into the entryway of the house of gravity control. Jack has now ushered us through the main door into the main part of the main living room of the house. Okay, now, people have told me, Brandenburg, you don't know Jack. I say, yes, I do know Jack. That's why I call him the Wolfman. But Jack is a smart guy. Everyone should listen to him. He has made a major discovery involving amplification of gravity modification through the right choice of materials, not vacuum. So, next, that's the end of the talk.
John, you are a rock star. Thank you. Thank you, man. Perfect.
Hey, I'm
timing,
practicing my air
delivery.
guitar here. I'm just doing my job. I'm just
yeah,
doing my job.
No, that was amazing. That was amazing. Let me bring everybody in here. We have got to give you an enormous hand. I'm going to bring everybody in that we've got. Okay, that's the whole gang.
Okay, guys.
Everyone,
I'm just doing my job.
Giant applause for John. So we've got about 5 minutes left. What?
I like it. I like it, Jeremy.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take myself back out, but if you guys want to discuss, if you have questions, I will be right back. And we've got about 5 minutes left here, guys.
All right. I wish I knew what you were doing. Is that motor spinning around with its inner and outer part there? And
no, it's just the center part, the coil with the copper windings. Yeah. That's stationary.
It's
the rotor part on the outside that you remove. You take that out.
Well, I don't understand how it could spin without the outside removed.
No, I'm sorry. It's Eric. It's the field that spins now.
Oh, it's the rotor inside.
It's only the field that spins. It's a vortex of pointing vectors.
Okay.
Okay,
that's
the
coil
secret.
there.
You don't throw away the rotor. It's got some nice magnets on it, But anyway, that part is discarded. All you care about is the coil, and the coil stays stationary. It's only the fields that rotate.
Well, I don't see why the field would rotate if there's an oscillating field going into it. It's an oscillating magnetic field. I don't understand it.
It's Tesla three-phase rotating fields. It was invented by Nikolai Tesla. This is the secret for an induction motor.
I just don't get it. I don't get it. The rotor is not rotating.
Everybody. If you run big industrial motors, they don't use two-phase. That's just wall current. They use three-phase, and it makes a rotating electromagnetic vector. You put a piece of metal in there, it rotates with the electromagnetic field.
Yeah, I think Brett,
Tesla.
John,
look up Tesla three-phase. Yes.
Yeah, so that's the circuit,
I just don't get it, and I'll let you go.
Yeah.
I don't know if my voice is coming through, but yeah. Hey, Eric, it's been a while since I've seen you, but you may remember me from the Foundations of Mind. But yeah, John. So it sounds like what you're talking about is just it sounds like you're rotating the ether. I mean, that's you that you're creating.
We're rotating the ether here.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. Yeah,
we're creating a vortex in the ether.